very delighted to be here with you today, and it's particularly special for me to speak at the Women's Leaders World Congress. And let me share with you a little bit about why that is. I am in a very unique position in that I have been working with trust, healing, and renewal for 25 years. And the person who's been beside me every step of the way is my husband, Dr. Dennis Reina. Now, I will share with you, ladies, and there are men in the room, but just for a moment, I'm going to speak to the ladies. As I've traveled around the world, there have been many ladies, women, who have whispered in my ear, Michelle, how on earth can you possibly work with your husband? I could never work with my husband. Well, I will share with you, there is nobody I would rather work with than my husband. Thank you. So Dennis and I are celebrating this year 25 years of marriage and 25 years of working around the world to bring trust, healing, and renewal. And a short time ago, we did something that many businesses do. We took a momentary pause, and we did a retrospective look back, and we made a very, very interesting observation, and that is that in the over 250 organizations we've had the privilege to work with, 80% of the doors that have been opened, 80% of the calls that have invited us in to an organization have been made by you, women in the workplace. And as I have spoken to you, who represents women all over the world, what Dennis and I have continued to discover is that, yes, we all have a need for trust in our workplace relationships and in our lifetime relationships. But there are some observations that women often make regarding some of the unique vulnerabilities of trust. And there's a way that women work together to preserve and protect that very special, precious ingredient of trust, because trust is what forges the connection that we have with one another at the human level. And women recognize how critically important that is. And during my time with you this morning, I'd like to share and review some of the key ingredients of trust. And I'd like for us to explore some of the ways that it is made fragile and vulnerable and what we can do about it. Before I move into the core of my talk with you, I'd also like to acknowledge some very special people here in the room. Dennis and I have been very blessed to forge some very wonderful relationships with others in pockets of the world who have joined us to bring trust building throughout the world. And I'd like to invite them to please stand. Ashley, Vimala, I believe you're here. Marie, please stand, ladies, please. We couldn't possibly do this alone. Please come and join me as we introduce the women to some core elements of trust building. Thank you. So please have a seat, make yourselves comfortable, and thank you for being with Dennis and I. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So let me share with you at just a very high level what it is that helps to build trust. And I'm going to just very briefly speak to what you notice here on the screen is a byproduct of the research Dennis and I have done over the last 25 years. And what you notice here are what we call 3 dimensions of trust. You'll notice the trust of character, the trust of communication, the trust of capability. These are 3 dimensions that, when in practice, forge that deep human connection in our relationships with other people. And what you also notice on the screen are the behaviors that build each of these dimensions. Now, we talk extensively about these dimensions and their behaviors in our book, Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace. When these behaviors are practiced, relationships thrive. People are in a position to do their very best work. They know they can count on and rely on and depend on one another. And they feel cared about and supported by one another. But there are times when these behaviors are not practiced consistently, and times when trust becomes vulnerable. And let me share with you a few examples of what that may look like. So imagine you're in a meeting and you're the project lead. And in the meeting, you're updating on specific aspects of the project, and you're asking if there are any questions about the next steps in the project. You're asking if there's any questions about the timeline, about the deliverables, and about the roles and responsibilities associated with the project. You're asking if there are questions or any issues or concerns, and everybody in the room is nodding with agreement, signaling to you that we're all on the same page. You walk out of the meeting and you're feeling, kind of upbeat. You're feeling pretty good, that you feel everybody is aligned and on purpose. Until later in the day, you're walking down the hall with a colleague and you discover that not everybody really is aligned and on purpose. There are some questions. There are some concerns, and they're talking about it. They're just not talking about it with you. So imagine you are delegated a task, you're delegated assignment, and you feel pretty good about that. It's an acknowledgement of your skills and your abilities. And through that delegation, here's an opportunity for you to use your gifts and your talents. And then within a couple of weeks, you find yourself in a point of confusion because your boss is looking over your shoulders and questioning your every move. Or imagine that you have a need for some critical information in order to fulfill a key part of a project that you're working on. And you're waiting for this critical information. And you've been following up and sending emails and leaving voicemails, and yet you're left up against a wall because you're not getting any response. Or perhaps you might be able to relate to Maria. Maria reported to the chief accounting officer in her organization. She was very, very talented. And she was so honored the day her boss came to her and asked her to help him prepare for a very important presentation that was to go to the CEO. And the CEO was going to use this presentation in a board meeting. Well, Maria was just so honored by this invitation to help prepare this presentation. She knew it was going to take a lot of work. She knew she was going to have to work into the evenings. She knew she was going to have to do some work over the weekends because this was above and beyond her day-to-day duties. But she so loved working for her company, and she was so honored by the opportunity to support her boss and the CEO that she took it on very willingly. So several days and a few weeks went by, and she continued to update her boss on her progress, and imagine her enthusiasm and her excitement when he invited her into the meeting where he was going to deliver the presentation to his boss, who was the CEO. The day the meeting came, Maria walked into the room. She's sitting at the table with her boss. Her boss takes the lead to deliver the presentation to the CEO. And as he delivers the presentation, everything is going well. The presentation is over. The CEO looks at Maria's boss and compliments him on the quality of the presentation, compliments him on how well it was done, and did not make a single request for suggestions or modifications. It was accepted exactly as is. Maria sat there with this sigh of relief inside of herself that, she did a good job. She met the needs of her CEO, and then her enthusiasm fell to the floor when her boss sat there and took credit for all of her work and never once acknowledged her efforts or her contribution. So I ask, do these examples I've just shared sound familiar to you? We all have these kinds of experiences. What I'd like to do is to take just a couple of moments, and I'd like you to turn to a partner by your side. And I'd like for the two of you to just share one experience that you've either had directly or that you are aware of, where trust has been made vulnerable, where there's been a disappointment or letdown, or perhaps your trust has been broken. Please turn to your partner and take a couple of moments to share that experience. Okay. I'd love to hear just a couple of examples, please. We don't need to go into the full details, but yes, Dennis, we have an example here.
So, hi everyone, my name is Priya Patra, and myself and Shweta, we were discussing that, she's from a research background, and I lead digital transformation programs. So many a times it happens, I'll first tell my experience, then she will relate hers. It happens so that same situation, the boss goes and takes the credit, but I know at the deep of my heart that this is not going to go long run. After 3 days, I get a call saying, you got to come and explain what you researched, what you did. So at that point of time, maybe I am not emotionally intelligent, I feel bad, maybe I'll go to the washroom and cry a little.
Yeah.
But that's fine, because after 3 days, I get a call back again.
Yes.
So
thank you so much.
I think one thing which I have learned in my 20 years of experience is get your storyboarding right. And give the presentation, keep the storyboarding with you, because when they are presenting to those who you are not around with, they'll come back and say, please come and represent because we just couldn't deliver. Okay. So I would always say the work speaks for itself. Keep that trust and belief in yourself. Your work will speak for itself.
Thank you, thank you. So we will talk about what do we do in those kinds of situations, but is there one more example of when you've experienced, did I see a hand? Oh, I thought I saw your hand. Is there one more example of how trust is made vulnerable? I see a hand here. Right here, Dennis.
The same thing happened to one of my colleagues, but in that case, it was just the opposite. The boss was a female and the teammate was a male. So I'll say it's not always that the male bosses take the credit. It can be like boss versus the subordinates.
Yes.
But it's like the KFC, like keep the secret recipe with you. You keep the thing with you, so at the end, you get the call.
Yeah, okay. So it's a beautiful point that yes, there are times when we as a woman may have our trust made vulnerable by a man, and there are as equal times when they may have been made vulnerable by a woman. So the point that I want to make here is that we all have some experiences when these behaviors may not be practiced consistently, when we experience others who have not kept their agreement and we suffer the consequences, when we may experience that it's not safe to admit a mistake because we may feel judged or criticized by the mistake, or we may experience that we're not involved, our voice is not included in a decision-making process, particularly one that impacts us. I myself have experienced the breach of trust. I have had my work taken by others. I have been up against the wall when others have not come through. And as Dennis and I travel around the world and work with leaders at all levels of responsibility, what I know from my own experience, that when we are in that mode where these behaviors are not being practiced and are not being practiced consistently, we can be thrown a little bit off course. We may stop and say to ourselves, oh my God, what is going on here? It can cause the ground to feel a little bit shaky underneath our feet, because at times it can feel so subtle. It can feel so subtle, and I love, we may go to the washroom, we may shed a tear, because in that moment we could be confused. And we can lose our equilibrium. I know for myself, when I have been in those experiences, I say to myself, what is going on here? What has happened? We may feel this visceral sense that our trust is being broken in some way, but we often don't know what to call this. We don't know what word or what language to use to name this. So I'd like to introduce you to a framework that does help us to name that experience when our trust is being broken, when we are feeling disappointed or let down. And as we are feeling disappointed and let down, we may actually feel betrayed. And what you'll notice here on this particular screen is a reference point to help us understand that word betrayal. Because I want to acknowledge it's a big word, and often big things happen that cause trust to be broken. And we heard some of those big things from our opening keynoter. But what this slide helps us to see is that in our workplace environment, there are often minor, smaller, unintentional things that cause trust to break down. The truth is, we don't really get up in the morning and set out to break trust. But because we are human beings, and as human beings we are imperfect, and because relationships are hard work, and at times relationships are challenged, there are ways that trust will break down and erode over time. So Dennis and I provide this as a reference point to help us more fully understand how trust is compromised. I'd like you to notice the minor examples, the major examples. And what I'd like to share is through our research, what we have discovered is the vast majority of behavior that causes trust to break down is on the minor, unintentional end of this spectrum. It's little things that happen, not showing up on time, not delivering agreement as promised. It's not the one time that it occurs, it's when it occurs over and over and over. You all with me on this? Now, how do we know that our trust is being broken? How do we know? We feel it. It has a visceral feeling that we all experience. When trust is present, it's energy expanding. We can feel the vibration of trust when it's there. We also feel its depletion when it is eroding or evaporating. I'd like you to take a moment now and turn back to your partner, and I'd like you to signal to one another when your trust has been made vulnerable, where in your body do you feel it? Please turn to your partner and signal, where do you feel it? Okay, I'd love to hear from a couple of people. When you've been in a mode where you're feeling hurt or disappointment or letdown, where do you feel it? How does it feel and where do you feel it?
Would like to share.
I feel it in my heart,
Ah.
but I'm not able to say it out. And then it goes from the heart, it goes to the body, launches on my shoulders and neck,
Okay.
and you feel quite stressed. And at the end of it, you get a headache,
Ah,
right? Because you're not able to really say it out that, hey, you're not supposed to do that, or
yes.
it's not right, whatever.
Yes.
That's where it feels. In the heart.
Did we all hear this?
In the heart. That's
Feel
right.
it in the heart. It comes to the shoulders. We can get a headache. It feels quite stressed. Yes, where do others feel it? Here, Dennis.
When I've experienced, I would say, a breach of trust, I literally feel it here in
Yes.
my heart.
Yes.
And honestly, it almost goes to my stomach.
Yes.
And it depends, because I think when you evolve in a leader, you're able to accept sometimes more incidents, and you think, oh,
Yes.
it's unintentional. But when
Yes.
you really know this is done intentionally,
Yes.
it's here. Yeah, I'm an
Yes.
emo person.
Yes. So when yes, I say, oh, lovely. From our young rising leader.
When my friends don't talk to me, I feel bad and I get hurt on my stomach.
Oh, on your stomach. Thank you. Thank you. That's where I feel it. In my gut. I will hurt. I will actually have pain. I so appreciate it. I may feel it here. You know, it's like, oh my goodness, what's going on? I might start to feel some tension in my head. And then as it progresses, I hurt in my stomach. People have often said to me, Dennis, I feel kicked in the stomach. I feel stabbed in the back. There's a visceral feeling. I'm wanting us to explore this. Why I'm asking that we explore this, because this visceral feeling is the sign and the indicator for us that something is off course. And typically speaking, we may be inclined to look the other way. You know, when trust has been broken once, we tend to extend grace, don't we? We tend to extend grace. We are the first, men as well, to often give the benefit of the doubt. And we will want to give a second chance and a third chance because relationships are so important to us and trust is so critical that we fight to preserve it. But as it continues to unfold, these tiny little paper cuts do add up. And when they add up, they can have a pretty significant impact on us. So I'd like to bring this to light through the story of one person and how this impacted her and what she did about it and how we can learn from her experience. So the story I'm sharing with you is the story about a woman, a leader named Susan. I first got to know Susan when her organization, which is a very, very large multinational research institute, we had the distinct honor of being called by them and were asked to come in and work with them to help them move through a very significant change process. And Susan was one of the leaders of this change process. And I must tell you, I loved working with Susan. She was bright, she was tenacious, she had a lot of chutzpah, and she had deep passion for her organization and was committed to the value that her organization served in the world. She had come to work for her organization out of college, and over a period of time, she had advanced herself into a leadership position. And you can just imagine how she felt the day that she was asked to lead a project. And this project was to pull together a team. This was going to be a 3 or 4 year project because Susan was hand-picked by a senior vice president in her institute to lead a multi-million-dollar real estate development project. Susan went to work and assembled a team. And a member of the team was a gentleman named Ken. And Susan didn't know Ken very well, but from a distance, she respected his skills and his abilities, and she knew he had some ingredients that she would need on this team to lead this multi-million-dollar real estate development project. As she assembled the team, a series of meetings unfolded, and in the meetings, as you can imagine, deadlines were set, milestones were established, roles and responsibilities were clarified, expectations were set, ground rules were provided, all of the things that leaders do to establish a team. And work was underway. And Susan felt very good about what was occurring and had confidence that the team was on course. Excuse me a moment. My mic is not on course. Susan is, but my mic isn't. So as Susan progressed with her team, there came a time when she was due to deliver a status update to her boss. And she thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to include Ken. It would give him a chance to have some exposure to her boss. It would give them a chance to deepen their collaboration. So she invited him to join her in this status presentation to her boss. The day the meeting came, Susan arrived in her boss's office. Her boss was Kathy. She was, very excited to give this update. She walked in, sat down. Kathy greeted her, and then Kathy walked over and began to shut the door. And as she began to shut the door, Susan quickly reminded her, "Oh, Kathy, Ken is on his way. I'm sure he'll be here any moment." Kathy turned to Susan and said, "Susan, we need to talk. Ken will not be coming." Well, in that moment, Susan began to have all the feelings that we have felt. She started feeling a flutter in her chest. She started feeling an anxiety in her belly. It was a Friday. That evening, at 6 o'clock, I'm in my office. And the phone rings, and it's Susan. And on the receiving end of the phone, I hear in her voice that quality of speech. You know that tone of voice that we recognize when a person is struggling? I heard that tone of voice in Susan. Susan went on to tell me that afternoon, Ken paid a visit to Kathy's office to tell Kathy that he did not believe that Susan was the right one for that role. He did not believe she had the leadership capability to lead that project. And he asked to be released from that project. So in that moment, on that phone call, what are some of the things that you imagine Susan might have been saying to me? What do you think? Just toss out a couple. She's shocked. She's shocked. How could he do this to me? She's divested. She's divested. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I don't belong here. Susan began saying in her shock, how could he have done this to me? How could I have not seen this coming? How did I allow this to happen? Maybe I don't have the skills. Maybe I don't have the abilities. Can you hear how I'm describing to you the way Susan began to turn on herself? Can you all see that? That is what happens when we're on the receiving end of our trust being broken. We begin to question and doubt ourselves. And we honestly ask, do I have what it takes? Is this the place for me? And we begin to wonder, maybe it's not. Susan said to me, is it possible that Ken is right and that I don't have what it takes? We've all been in similar situations. In our opening keynote, we heard about choice. We do not have control over how other people behave. We do not. We don't have control over how they conduct in our workplace. And I'm focusing on workplace, but for clarity, this applies to our personal lives as well. But we have control over how we choose to respond. Susan chose to take what occurred and use it as an opportunity for her growth and development. She chose to use it as an opportunity to heal and renew. And I offer the 7 steps for healing as a pathway for us to step into and work through our pain. Susan placed a phone call. She picked up and reached out for help. She acknowledged what happened and allowed herself to articulate her pain, her hurt, her disappointment, her letdown. But Susan then quickly moved in to reframe that experience. And when she reframed that experience, she shifted her focus away from what Ken did to her and returned her focus onto the opportunities that forged ahead of her, which was this extraordinary opportunity to serve her university, her academic institute, through this multi-million-dollar project. She shifted her focus to take responsibility, and she took responsibility by remembering the truth of who she is. And she returned to the knowledge that, by golly, I do have what it takes. This is my role. I do have the skills, and nobody will take my capability away from me. Nobody. She forgave herself for questioning that maybe he was right. She forgave him for losing his way. And Susan harnessed her skills and her capabilities, and she let go and moved on. And she successfully led that project and went on to lead many, many others. So I share Susan's story with you as an introduction to these 7 steps, that there will be times when trust is made vulnerable, and we have choice on how we respond, and we have a pathway we can take, we can walk to learn how to trust again.
Dr. Michelle Reina, my
Yes.
profuse and humble apologies for interrupting, but I've been instructed that we are running out of time. And as you know, she has a very valuable information to share. All of you can have one-on-one with them if they want to talk to you.
Yes, I'm coming to
personally.
closure right now.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And I will be here for the remainder of the conference. And if you have questions or would like to chat further, please come and see me. Thank you very much.